So in this lecture, we're going to look at the physical development of toddlers. So toddlers, the big story here is that the quantitative growth that we saw during the first year of life, during their infant years, from 1 month to about 1 year, was quite dramatic. So we saw, for example, a tripling of the child's weight. We saw a 50% increase in the child's length. We saw, basic milestones like crawling and walking, and things of that sort. What you're going to see more in the toddler years is going to be a qualitative increase in terms of like their physical development. And what that means, you're going to see more control over, let's say, motor skills. You're going to see a development of their internal organ systems. You're going to see a change in eating habits. You're going to see, let's say, a hardening and development of teeth. And you're going to see kind of a transition from clearly an infant or a baby state to something that's more akin to a small adult, which means you're going to start to see things like the curvature of the spine. And we're going to take a look at this during this lecture about some of those qualitative changes that will be going on. So as I said before, toddlers, and just to reset, let's say, our boundaries of what we mean by this term, a toddler is basically a child who has learned to walk, and generally that occurs about 1 year in age. So we're going to look at from 1 to about 3 years of age during this lecture. And as I said before, you're going to see a slower growth in infants. So we saw a tripling of weight. We're not going to see, let's say, the same pace of, let's say, physical growth in terms of mass. We're also not going to see a change in height. So roughly by the end of your first year, you're going to be about a 50% increase in your initial height. By this time, the brain, the skull will close around, the fontanelles of the skull will have closed around the brain. And so you're going to see development, but it's not going to be as fast and it's not going to be as dramatic as it was in the first year. So in terms of the brain is about 80% of the adult volume by the first toddler year. So this means that a lot of the wiring that has occurred, which means they have built up a lot of the neurons in their brain, they have started to prune them down as they've been responding to environmental stimuli. So what's going to increase is that the density of the synapses is going to be about twice that of the adult brain. So the wiring is kind of done, but what you haven't seen is, let's say, the pruning, the process that's going to occur fully yet. The myelination of the neurons, which means the fatty tissue, the sheath that goes around the neurons, is going to be speeding up, like how fast or how rapid, and this means that their ability to take in sense from their environment, their ability to think, is going to be a lot more efficient and a lot faster than it was at earlier stages. And what you're going to see is that more of the genetic and, let's say, the environmental in that first year, you're probably going to see the same kind of development in terms of like all infants are going to kind of be growing at the same way, regardless of what their genetic or their environmental stimuli are. What you're going to see in this stage is that there's going to be, let's say, a manifestation of the genetic heredity, and what you're going to see is, let's say, obvious, let's say, reactions to things in their environment. So the point is that this is about the stage where you might say, okay, we are starting to see some types of developmental delays, and be able to see whether things are problems and require, let's say, interventions. So what you're going to see is the maturation of your internal organs. So these are not things that are going to be visible, but things are going to become more efficient. So your heart and lungs are going to be more efficient. This means that you're going to see a decrease in terms of like the pulse, because the heart is not having to beat as fast. You're going to see breathing is going to slow down a bit because the lung capacity is going to be greater. The excretory system, which means your kidneys and your bladder, you're going to have more, in a sense, conscious control over that. Where a child might just, in a sense, not really have control of when they defecate or when they urinate, you're going to start to see them to have like physical control and, let's say, time it, and so this is going to allow for toilet training that's going to occur during this time. Height and weight. So once again, some of us will be taller or shorter than others. Some of us will be heavier. Some of us will be lighter than others. But during, let's say, toddlerhood, during this, let's say, first to third year of life, what you're going to see is you're going to be reach about half of what their full adult height is going to be. So generally, you're going to see somewhere in 2 to 3 feet for most toddlers, maybe a little bit higher than 3 feet if they're a bit taller. And so you're going to see you can kind of start to get a prediction of their adult height, simply like taking their height and kind of doubling it. So what you're going to see is the loss of the typical shape that you might find, let's say, in infants, where the head is really oversized compared to the body. And you're going to be able to see the body proportions that are kind of similar to their adult proportions, where they're going to be heavy set, where you're going to be square, where you're going to be long and thin. And you should start to see kind of like the early indications of your body build type. So whether you're a mesomorph or ectomorph, and like, let's say, whether you're going to be middle, kind of thin, or let's say heavy set. So, as I've mentioned before, toddlers' bones, they're in the process of calcification, which means that they're becoming more rigid over the time as the calcium deposits get set. Their bones are going to be a little more flexible. This which is saying that if they have injuries, they're going to heal a lot quicker than, let's say, an adult person will. And so there's going to be a little more flexibility, but also, let's say, carrying weight and standing upright is going to happen at the beginning of the toddler stage. This is going to allow them to stand up and to walk. And you're going to see them walk more and more upright and be more confident. You're going to see them be able to bend their knees more as their muscles develop. Another key thing here is that the fontanelles, which means the different plates of the skull, are going to fuse together. So you're going to have a complete skull. You're not going to no longer have the soft spot at the top of the skull. You're going to see the spine, which might be more straight and stiff. It's going to take kind of that S curve, where between your shoulder blades it bends out, and then the lower back it bends in. So you're going to start to see that S shape form in the curve. And by the 2 years, in the middle of the toddler stages, most children will have a full set of let's say, their baby teeth, which means they'll be able to chew more, they'll be able to cut food with their mouth. And this is going to enable them to, let's say, move to the next stage in terms of having what you might call table food, or food that is similar to adult food, but maybe, let's say, cut down to smaller, let's say, bites. But the point is that they don't need purees, they don't need to be as dependent upon milk as they were at earlier stages. So what you might see is like a weaning off of certain types of foods, even though the child might still love milk, or like a particular food, or cookies, or things that are easily dissolvable. What you're going to see is caregivers or parents try to transition them to, let's say, more mature food. So a key thing here is, because they're kind of reaching their, by the time this age group between 1 and 3 years, if a child is heavy set, that might indicate that it's not simply baby fat anymore, but it might be that they're overeating and that there might be over, let's say, a healthy weight. So what happens generally when you are an infant is that you need all that extra energy because you're growing, and so all that extra, let's say, body mass and extra body fat is going to be converted into energy, and that energy is going to be used to spur physical growth. But because your growth is slowing down during that 1 to 3 year toddlerhood period, if you continue to eat at the same rate, it's going to build up as long-term body fat, and it's not going to, let's say, be supporting like physical growth, at least for most children. And so you might be more aware. So if a child is heavy set, 2 to 3 years of age, you might, let's say, start considering what they're eating and how much they're eating. A key thing here is also, because they're going to be moving more, because they're able to walk on their own, they're able to stand upright, there's going to be a higher level of activity. So they should be burning more, let's say, body fat than they would, let's say, if they're mostly, let's say, lying on their back or crawling. So the point is that in an infant, to have baby fat and to be kind of rotund and not very developed is pretty normal, but if they continue that into their 2nd and 3rd year, you might be more concerned. So you're going to see a continuation of large muscle development. So this is going to aid both gross motor control, and then you're going to also see their ability to coordinate their fingers and their toes for, let's say, fine motor control. So you're going to see them able to stand up. You might, toward the end of this period, see them be able to jump up and down, in a coordinated fashion, which means they can push up with both legs and land on their feet and not fall. So you're going to see strengthening, particularly as they start to walk more. Leg muscles, you might see, let's say, developing the arm muscles, the ability to pull themselves up and climb will be, let's say, enhanced compared to earlier periods of time. And generally, as I said at the very beginning, a toddler is a toddler because they're able to walk. So generally, around as early as 9 months, but more likely around 12 months, you're going to see the child walk on their own or walk upright. So between about 9 and 15 months. And it's going to be like, unsteady, so they might, first of all, use things to hold themselves up, kind of like low-level furniture. But then you're going to be able to, like, walk 2 or 3 steps and maybe fall. They might alternate between walking and crawling. But generally, by a year and a half, you're going to see them prefer to stand upright, to sit down, prefer to walk than to crawl. And you're going to see them, in a sense, do spurts of speed in terms of walking. And it's going to be kind of like uh, hit and miss, which means sometimes they'll be able to run and other times they'll be able to walk. So the point is that you'll see what might seem to be a huge development and maybe kind of a backtrack to an earlier, let's say, capacity level at this period. So the point is that they might be able to walk, but then they might not walk consistently, then they'll walk consistently, and then they'll be able to run, and they'll be able to run consistently and on purpose and intentionally rather than, let's say, bursts of speed where they're kind of almost moving their legs to keep their legs under them because they're moving too faster than they can control themselves. Well, how many jump you're going to see in this period, but it's not like set at a time. Some children might be able to do it earlier depending on whether they've been scaffolded or what is in their environment that's kind of pushing them to try out certain climbing and jumping activities. You might see them start to pick up things and throw things, which means they won't be able to throw it like a teenager would, in the sense like throw with accuracy and throw with distance. But you might see them pick up a ball and try to push it. You might see them kick a ball intentionally, and which means kick it into a direction as opposed to just bump into it and the ball goes where it will. So you're going to see them throw a rigid posture, but they're probably going to do what mostly I would call an arm throw, which means they're going to throw with, from their shoulder to their hand, but they're not going to, in a sense, step into the throw and throw it with their body. So they're not going to have, let's say, much force about it, but also probably less accuracy. They might be able to catch something that if it's thrown right at them, so something that's into their chest, they might be able to smother with both arms, but they're not going to be able to catch it, let's say, like a baseball player would catch it in one hand with a mitt. Small muscle development. So you're going to start to see, like, as they use finger foods, as they use different toys like shape sorters, they're going to be able to develop their fine muscle movements, which means their hands and their fingers. They're going to be a lot more their eye-hand coordination, which means when they begin to eat, they're just going to smash the food kind of in the general direction of their mouth and their face, probably, let's say, a whole handful, and they're going to be able to pick up smaller pieces, like little carrot cubes, and be able to pick it up individually and put it directly into their mouth, and there won't be, let's say, as much food falling down their face and, let's say, going here and there. Part of this is just, in a sense, the brain is able to coordinate the sensory input through the eyes with, let's say, the motor movement of their hands, and as a result, as the brain develops and is able to coordinate that, it'll become almost unconscious, which means that when a child is small, they might need to look at their hand to understand where it's moving, and be able to look at it, have both eyes picking something up, look at it as it goes into their mouth, and kind of steer it consciously. What you're going to be able to see is that people will be able to pick things up without looking at it. Their sense of proprioception of where, let's say, their spatial organization of their body will be better, and they'll be able to kind of eat without consciously thinking about it. It'll just be kind of, let's say, just like an adult or a teenager, you can look away and put something into your mouth without, having to intentionally and consciously think about it. And just the overall development of dexterity, which is partly development of the strength of the muscles, and also partly the brain's development, able to coordinate, let's say, intentional movement where the brain is doing things and able to pick things up, which means the brain's ability to visualize it and to coordinate different muscle systems together. So key thing that's going to change is just how you're feeding a child, and a lot of this is because they're not growing as much, and so you don't need to give them as much, let's say, energy, but you might have to worry more about their nutrition, which means the balancing what they're eating. So their eating habits are not going to be as patterned, but they're going to be more about kind of like an adult human, trying to kind of cover all the nutritional bases, but not necessarily having them at every single meal. So you're going to start to see them weaned off breast milk or formula and start eating things that are table food, so things that are at first pureed, but then, let's say, chopped up, maybe, but more or less resembling, let's say, food that you would make for yourself as a teenager or for yourself as an adult. You're going to see appetite decreases. So as they don't need to grow, they're not going to feel as hungry, and as I was saying earlier, you start to like take more into account the fact of their body build. That if they're carrying a lot of weight in their second and third year, that doesn't indicate kind of, let's say, a baby fat that is common in their infant years, but it might indicate, let's say, um, uh, being overweight. And so you might, let's say, cut back on the snacks or be more disciplined about doing that rather than just say, look, the child is hungry, give it some food. So in the first half of the toddler, so from 1 to 2, what you're going to do is start to see introducing new foods, which means going beyond just liquid foods, going beyond just milk and formula. So things that you want to mix proteins with starches and with vegetables and things of that sort. And the key thing about here is introducing to a wide variety of foods, so you might keep a track of what they're eating, because you're kind of see whether they're having any type of allergic reaction. So some doctors would say like introduce peanut butter during this period, other types of like nuts into their diet, especially as long as you have something like Benadryl or some type of allergy medicine, because you want, if you expose them to certain of these things that people are generally allergic to, they might, let's say, develop um, a familiarity with them, and therefore they won't have the same allergic reaction. And so that they try to introduce a variety of different foods, one to kind of identify allergies, but the second thing is um, to basically create a familiarity with their body so there isn't an allergic reaction and it's not seen as a foreign substance. So you're right, you might see during this period is a lot of skin rashes that reflect allergic reactions to ingesting different types of foods. So you're going to, not give them a full portion, but give them a taste of things. And so you'll find a lot of things that are mixing a lot of different tastes together. And children are not as picky because food is food is food. It doesn't need to be prepared in the way that you might want food set in front of you as a teenager or as an adult. In the second half of the toddler period, what you're going to start doing is that you are going to kind of like what used to be called the 4 food groups, but now it's called My Plate, which is that you're going to eat scheduled meals, you're going to eat many small meals, but these meals are going to be, let's say, nutritionally balanced. So the point is that you're not focusing on just, let's say, high calcium, high iron, things that would be in formula or in breast milk. You might start to, let's say, reduce that, drink more water, less milk. You might see, in a sense, balancing, proteins and vegetables and things of that sort in terms of like how you're putting meals together. So the last big topic is we're going to talk about is toilet training. And toilet training is one of those things where there's a range at which it occurs, but the point is that children develop earlier or later. Some might take it to it very readily, some might be very resistant, and this is a kind of an interesting period that all parents go through. So generally, a child is going to be in complete control, like in awake periods as opposed to sleeping, by about 28 months. So what that is about a little after 2 years old, so kind of at the end of the toddler period, they're going to be able to go to the bathroom by themselves. Um, so a lot of it is just a kind of what's developing here psychologically, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about social and emotional development, is kind of the development of shame. And so the idea that, when a small infant is defecating or urinating, they don't necessarily, they see it as kind of, their reaction as kind of surprise, because it's something that's happening. They can feel it in the emotions in their body, but they don't control it. But the fact that that they're messy or dirty, and that they're starting to interact with maybe other small children, there might be a feeling of shame. And therefore, adults are going to provide a kind of a supportive and structured environment, a lot of rewards, kind of, let's say, when they go to the bathroom, giving them a clap or, high-pitched voice and encouragement and praise, because it's something that they're going, there's going to be shame associated with it. They're going to feel like a lack of control in the sense that listening to their body and trying to read their signals, and not just in a sense rely upon having a diaper and having adults, let's say, change their diaper. So you're going to see a variety of different methods. I think there's a lot of different ways of doing this. I don't think anyone has mastered it quite yet. In some cultures, they start toilet training much earlier. In the United States, it's going to happen kind of at the end of the second year into the beginning of the second year, and so that, as I said, this will be a transitional period. And it can go as late as, let's say, children will wear diapers almost up to preschool, sometimes nursery school. And it generally is seeing whether other children are doing the same, and if other children seem to be developed, they might be able to do it cognitively, they might be able to do it physically, they may not prefer not to do it because, like, hey, if someone else can, change and wipe you, why should I do this myself? And the idea is that they can do it, but they choose not to do it on their own. And then what they might see is that if they are kind of staying in that stage and see other children moving along and other children being more independent, they might decide to be more like that. And that. So the point is that you might be seemingly behind, but it's just the child kind of showing some will and volition about whether they want to do it on their own. So there's a lot of things going on in terms of what allows you to do toilet training. And the first one is just the internal organ development that allows you to control things like your bladder and your kidneys, which means that the idea that you really don't have, let's say, enough muscle control to be able to hold it intentionally. The second thing is just kind of the development of some motor skills, which means your ability to control the muscles in your body to kind of tense up, and also just, in a sense, listening to your body and your brain recognizing that your bladder or your colon are full and they need to be evacuated. So and what I was trying to get at the last slide is that there's a little bit of an emotional readiness to this. There's a development of whether, the development of shame, but also the idea that, where they are compared to their peers and the desire for more independence that occurs at this stage, which means that they might be physically able to do something, but they might not be emotionally or intellectually ready to do something. So that some children can go quite late. So, I mean, well into, let's say, you might say preschool years, sometimes even into the beginning of kindergarten. And what's happening is that they might be able to do it, like, i.e., you've trained them, they know what to do, they can explain it to you, and then I say, well, why should I do it? And generally, it's going to be something internally pushing them to want to, let's say, have more control and independence and be more grown up. That's going to occur at this stage. It's going to be kind of the emotional development that's going to support, let's say, toilet training. So, one thing, and as a parent, I have found this very difficult during the pandemic, is that, you know, taking away their devices, taking away their phones, spending less time in front of a TV watching shows, so less idle activity, and trying to encourage more physical activity, going outside, going to a playground, running around, running, throwing, because that's going to be how you're going to develop some of your physical skills, but also I think intellectually that you're going to develop some coordination, you're going to develop some diverse environments and things of that sort. And so these are things that have to be encouraged by the adult or the caregiver, taking them to a playground, going outside, planning activities that kind of address the motor milestones, which means as they're able to run, they're able to pick up a ball, to actually do things that where they're going back and forth, kind of getting a lot of like repetition, but also a lot of support to these skills as they become ready to do them. What you're going to see is, once again, toddlers are going to sleep a lot. 12 to 14 hours of sleep doesn't mean 12 or to 14 hours at one stretch. So you might see they might sleep 10 hours overnight, so maybe something like 7 p.m. to about 7 a.m. And then, 1 or 2 hour nap, sometimes longer in the late morning or the early afternoon. What will be different about this is that they may not want to go to sleep. They might want to be up, and so the point is that um, you might have more resistance at this stage than you would have the infant stage, which means they'll cry because they're putting to bed, even though they're obviously cranky and tired. They might be able to put them to bed. They'll try to escape from their cribs. They will be in their cribs and crying, not because they're not tired, but because they don't want to be separated from, let's say, their parents or the adults, or where they see things going on. And so they might fight to stay up, even though they're obviously physically at the point where they need to rest.